They say you learn the weakest parts of a life only when something pulls at a single thread. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. Let's see. For me, that thread started with a phone call in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the voice on the other end that sounded small and frantic enough to break. My younger sister, Emily, was the one who called. She told me fast, words tumbling, "Dad, come home. Mother had a stroke." I didn't think. I booked the first available flight out of town. I remember the way the dawn looked through the airport glass. A hard, thin light that made everything feel unreal. I remember my hands shaking when I called the house to say I had to leave. I remember, above all, the relief I felt when Claire, my daughter, volunteered to stay behind. "Don't worry about a thing," she said, calm as if she were reading from script. "I'll take care of Mom. You go be with Aunt Joan. We'll handle it here." That was the promise that let me go. It felt like an answer to prayer. Claire had always been practical. She knew her grandmother's habits, where the pill organizer sat, which shows calmed her on bad days. She'd sat in that living room for years, knitting while Mom complained about the Blue Jays or fussed with crossword puzzles. She'd been in and out of the house enough to know the small things that matter when someone begins to lose their bearings. For the first week, the calls were as expected. I rang from the hospital room, and Claire would pick up and say, "Mom's stable, Dad. We're watching her favorite shows. I'm making sure she eats." Her voice was steady. I believed it. I told myself the most important thing was to be there with my sister, with our mother, while the doctors worked. Then, during the second week, the pattern changed. The calls began going to voicemail. Text messages replaced conversations. "Sorry, busy with Mom." "She's okay." Claire typed back once. "Call you later." But she never called later. I tried calling Mom directly, and it went straight to voicemail too. At first, I accepted the explanation. Hospital staff were busy, things were hectic. I told myself Claire had it under control. I stayed. My mother's situation demanded me. She needed someone she recognized, a familiar face. I watched her sleep in the sterile pale light of the ward. I watched the nurses fuss over tubes and machines. I call home more often, but mostly listen to voicemail beeps. It sits in your stomach like a small stone when the person making excuses for you is also the person you trusted the most. The uneasy thing about memory loss is how often it confuses what is true and what isn't. Margaret, my Evelyn, my wife of nearly 50 years, could forget small things and still flash the old Evelyn in the middle of a laugh at a stupid joke. She knew how to make a pot of tea. She loved the ball games. She could still find her favorite sweater in a pile of laundry. That made her confusion all the more cruel. You could see the person you loved hovering at the edges, sometimes present, sometimes gone. Detective Alvarez sat across from me when I got home the first time. He had the kind of face that keeps details and doesn't give much away, the man who had been doing this job long enough to hear every possible explanation. He listened to my retelling, the flight, the hospital, the missed calls, and he scribbled as if the act of writing would make sense of it. Then he asked the question that turned my blood cold. "During those 2 weeks," he said, looking up, "did you sign any documents giving Claire power of attorney over Evelyn's affairs?" "No," I said. I remember the clarity of that denial. "Absolutely not." "Did anyone else sign on her behalf?" he asked. "Not that I'm aware of." He closed his notebook slowly. "All right," he said, without emotion, "we'll have to investigate. But, Mr. Lane, this is sounding more than neglect. Please keep your phone close." I should have known by then that the words he used were the same ones that would live with me for months. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, unlawful confinement. But what they called it at the station didn't prepare me for the scene that awaited at my own house. I got home on day 3 of my mother's hospital stay. I needed answers. I needed to see with my own eyes what my daughter had been managing. The front door opened the way it always had, familiar creak and the smell of lemon cleaner under the wool coats. Upstairs, the house was quiet in that way only an ordinary domestic space can be when something has been taken out of it. The absence of a radio left a thin silence. I moved toward the basement door without thinking. The basement had always been more utilitarian than cozy, a place for canned goods, a little workbench where my father had kept tools, a stack of old albums. I expected to find boxes, maybe a spilled bag, the usual small disorder. I did not expect the metal padlock fastened from the outside. I stood there and the smell hit me first. Stale air, something unwashed and sour. The light in the stairwell was out. Someone had removed the bulb. I went down on instinct, and on the last step, I saw the blanket on the concrete floor, a small, thin thing that had been shoved into a corner. There was a tin basin near the wall. There was no proper bedding, no food, no water jug, nothing that you give someone you intend to care for. My Evelyn sat there in the hollow of the basement like a small, wounded bird. She looked up when I called her name. For a second, she smiled with the old recognition that used to warm me. Then she turned her head, puzzled as if she didn't know why she was being asked that question. "Is Claire home?" she asked, voice small. "Jenny was just making me lunch. When I say I felt physically ill, it's no flourish." The floor dropped out. I remember the sound of my own breath. Everything in my body cataloged the wrongness of the scene. There was soot on her hands from coal-like dirt, the kind women get when they've been rummaging without knowing. Her clothes were the same dress she'd worn to the doctor's last week, unchanged for days. The thing that pierced me more than anything was the look on her face, the confusion, the tiny, pleading trust that hadn't been earned or deserved. Upstairs in the kitchen, I found things that told their own story. A laptop open on the table, the password saved. I'm not proud of this, but I clicked. I read things I wish I had never been given the right to read. Scanned copies of forms. A pair of pages that bore a shaky signature. A document labeled power of attorney. Bank statements. A file titled Investment Venture, Marcus's Growth Fund. I sat down at that kitchen chair, and the world became very small around me. The first week I had been gone. The week I believed Claire was being my mother's carer. The truth had been different. Claire had, it seemed, taken Evelyn to some quick notary, a person outside our usual circle, someone who didn't ask the right questions. With that shaky signature, Claire had accessed accounts. She had withdrawn $100,000 from our savings, and she'd taken out a line of credit secured against the house for $175,000. The sums hit like blows. Our home, the place we'd paid off outright 40 years ago, was suddenly collateral. All that money, $275,000, had been moved to a company called Sterling Ridge Management. The company name looked clean and professional on the screen, but when I clicked through, the paperwork showed a barely formed corporation registered only a few months earlier. Its stated business was digital asset trading and advisory, a phrase that read like a promise and smelled faintly of con. I stayed there at the kitchen table reading until my hands stopped having the steady feel of my life. I called Detective Alvarez. I showed him the laptop, the documents, the state of the basement. He didn't flinch. He knew what I knew and what I had yet to realize fully. We were not merely victims of a lapse in judgment. This was intentional. This was planned. When I think back to those first hours, I can still feel the tilt of the house under my feet, the way the familiar became foreign. I remember telling myself that I had returned in time, that if I had been gone longer, the consequences could have been far worse. I did not yet know, then, how the rest of the story would read. The flight plans discovered in a trash can, the hasty attempts to empty a life of value into accounts that evaporated at the click of a mouse, the officers at our door. But in those first minutes, the truth was only beginning to uncurl. I held my wife's hand and promised, in a voice that startled me for its calm, that I would fix it. I don't know where that calm came from. Perhaps it was shock. Perhaps it was some small, stubborn part of the man I had been who still wanted to protect his family. I promised myself then that I would get answers, that I would, if I could, make right the wrong that had been done while I was away. Detective Alvarez returned later that afternoon with 2 uniformed officers and a quiet, steady presence that reminded me of someone who had walked into dozens of houses where a family story had ruptured. He took the laptop carefully, placed it in an evidence bag, and moved through the rooms with a kind of methodical patience that made me feel both calmer and sicker at once. My wife, my Evelyn, had been taken to the hospital. They told me she needed hydration, warmth, basic care. At her age, in her condition, being trapped in that cold, airless basement for nearly a fortnight was enough to push her dangerously close to something irreversible. I signed papers, answered questions, and watched as nurses wheeled her away. She whispered once, "Claire will be back soon," and I had to turn my head so she wouldn't see whatever was written on my face. When the officers finished their sweep of the house, Detective Alvarez motioned to me. "Mr. Lane," he said in that careful tone professionals use when every word matters, "we found clear signs of intentional confinement. There's nothing accidental about a padlock installed externally. He might as well have told me the sun rises." I already knew, but hearing it stated plainly, with legal weight, made something inside me twist. He continued, "Your daughter, Claire, do you know where she lives currently?" "Yes," I said, and I gave him the address. She shared a townhouse unit with her husband, Marcus, in an up-and-coming development near the waterfront, the kind of place full of exposed brick and hanging plants and new money. I'd visited once for dinner. I brought a bottle of wine. They'd served quinoa salad and something with turmeric that stained my fingers. It felt so benign at the time. "We'll send officers," he said. He paused then, studying me. It wasn't an intrusive look, more the expression of someone preparing to add weight to something already too heavy. "Mr. Lane, the financial documents suggest this was premeditated. The transfers, the forged authority, the company structure, nothing about this was spur of the moment." I nodded, unable to speak. He looked toward the staircase, toward the basement door that still hung open like a wound in the middle of the house. "Your wife is going to need time to recover. And you should prepare yourself. There may be more. Fraud cases like this often connect to other victims." Other victims. The phrase hung in the air, a cold echo. They left shortly after, taking with them the laptop, photographs, the lock itself. When the house went quiet again, I walked through each room as though expecting something to jump at me. But the house did what houses do. It simply held the silence. I found myself back in the kitchen, staring at the empty table. I couldn't stop looking at the mug Claire had used earlier, her favorite one, the one with the chipped rim and the faded outline of a mountain range on it. It seemed impossible that someone you raised, someone whose skinned knees and school recitals you once cared for, could do something so calculated, so deliberate. I sat and waited for the phone to ring. It rang 2 hours later. "Mr. Lane," Detective Alvarez said, "officers arrived at the townhouse. No one is home." A pause. "But we found something." I felt the familiar sick tightening in my throat. "What?" "The place has been mostly cleared out. Furniture gone. Personal items gone. Closets empty. However, papers rustled on his end. They left trash. In it, we found shredded bank statements, crumpled flight itineraries, and printed correspondence. It looks like they were preparing to leave the country within the next few days." I closed my eyes. "Where?" "A rental inquiry in southern Spain. A half-year lease. A reference to payment in digital assets. Spain. I imagined them somewhere sunny, walking through narrow streets, drinking wine on balconies with the money they stole from us from Evelyn, while she lay locked and forgotten in a basement that smelled of mildew and despair. Why didn't they finish cleaning out? I asked, voice hollow. "Likely rushed," he said, "or they thought they still had time. They underestimated how soon you returned." Underestimated, yes. They thought I'd still be gone, still distracted by hospital machines and whispered medical updates. They didn't count on my mother stabilizing faster than expected. They didn't count on me walking through my own door before the last piece of their escape plan snapped shut. "They'll try again," Alvarez said. "We've put out an alert. Border services have their information now. If they attempt to fly, they'll be stopped. If they cross by land, systems will flag them." His voice softened. "Mr. Lane, your coming home early may very well have saved your wife's life." There was again the truth spoken plainly. After we hung up, I walked back into the basement and stood in the doorway, staring at the space where Evelyn had been kept. The blanket was still curled in the corner. The basin still sat against the wall. And the removed bulb, that senseless cruelty, lay on the floor as if discarded casually after its purpose had been served. I leaned against the wall, suddenly tired all the way through my bones. I thought about the 2 weeks I'd been gone. The 2 weeks Evelyn had spent in near darkness while Claire texted me that everything was fine. I thought of every voicemail I'd left, every reassurance she'd offered. I thought of the way she'd said, "Don't worry, Dad." And I wondered, truly wondered, whether she had ever intended for her mother to still be alive when I returned. That night, the house felt colder than it had in years. I sat in the living room with a blanket around my shoulders, waiting for a call that might tell me they'd been found, waiting for any new piece of the truth. Every creak in the walls felt wrong. Every shadow stretched too long. I kept seeing Evelyn's eyes, tired but trusting, and the way she asked me whether Claire had gone to make her lunch. When the call finally came the next morning, it was not the news I wanted. They weren't on any flights overnight, Alvarez reported, but they attempted to withdraw more funds. That gave us a trail. They're still in the country, but moving, on the run, like fugitives. Except they weren't running from some shadowy adversary. They were running from the consequences of what they'd done to a woman who had held Claire as a newborn, who had sewn her Halloween costumes, who kept every birthday card she ever drew. By midday, officers coordinated with financial crime specialists. More evidence surfaced, more transfers, more signs of a long-planned escape. And while the professionals worked, I sat at my wife's bedside at the hospital, brushing her hair back gently, whispering reassurances she'd forget within minutes. She held my hand weakly. Sometimes she called me by name. Other times, she stared past me as though I were a kind stranger. In those hours, I understood something I had never fully realized before. You can grieve a person long before they leave this world. And some losses come not from death, but from betrayal so deep it rearranges the way your memories fit together. Sometime that night, Evelyn squeezed my hand and whispered, "Where's Claire?" I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break something inside her. So I said the only thing that felt merciful. "She's away for a bit," I whispered. "But I'm here. I'm right here." And I stayed until she slept. 3 days after finding Evelyn in that basement, the police called again, this time at dawn. I'd been half awake, the hospital chair pressing into my spine, when my phone vibrated against my palm. "Mr. Lane," Detective Alvarez said, "we've located your daughter." There was no satisfaction in his tone, just fatigue. He'd seen too many of these endings to mistake them for victories. "They're in the next province, a small town off the main highway. Motel registration under Marcus's name. We have a team approaching." I sat there, feeling the words like small thuds in my chest. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt only the weight of what was coming. The confrontation no father wants to imagine. By mid-morning, Alvarez called again. "They're in custody," he said. "Do you want to come down to the station?" Part of me wanted to refuse, to let the justice system handle it, and keep myself at a distance. But another part, the one that had carried Evelyn out of that basement, the one that had stayed awake beside her hospital bed, knew I needed to see my daughter's face. Not to accuse, not even to demand, just to understand. The interview room was smaller than I'd imagined. Pale walls, one metal table, a faint hum of fluorescent lights. When they brought Claire in, she looked thinner than I remembered, her hair tied hastily, her clothes wrinkled. There was defiance in her posture at first, the kind that comes from someone who's been cornered but hasn't yet accepted defeat. "Dad," she said, almost too casually, like we'd just met for coffee. I couldn't speak. She sat, folded her hands, and glanced toward the window, the mirrored glass behind which Alvarez stood, silent. "You're probably angry," she began, "but you don't understand. You've always been too trusting. Mom would need all that money just sitting there doing nothing." Marcus said dash. I raised my hand. "Stop," I said quietly. Something in my tone must have broken through, because her words caught midair. I leaned forward. "You locked your mother in a basement, Claire. You left her without food or warmth. You forged her name. You took her life savings. And you want me to believe this was what? An investment opportunity." Her eyes flickered, guilt, fear, pride, all fighting for control. "You think I meant to hurt her?" she snapped. "You think I wanted that?" Marcus said it was temporary. Just until dash. Until what? Her voice faltered. Until we could transfer the funds and pay it back. We were going to move Mom into a care home once things settled. "You don't get it, Dad. You've lived your whole life being small, careful, ordinary. Marcus said we could double everything in a year. He had contacts, crypto funds, overseas trading, people who knew how to make money move. I stared at her, every word landing like an insult to reason. So you risked your mother's life for a promise from a man who doesn't even have a degree? Her chin trembled, but she pressed on. It wasn't like that at first. He said he'd need temporary control of the assets, that we'd just transfer them for a few weeks. But when Mom started asking questions, when she didn't recognize him, he panicked. He said she might report him, that everything would fall apart. He said locking her downstairs was just for a night, until she calmed down. I didn't mean for it to be so long. I swear, Dad, I didn't. I felt my throat tighten. And you never called for help. Never checked if she was eating, if she was even alive. Tears rolled down her face, but I couldn't tell if they were from remorse or from fear of the consequences now closing in. Alvarez stepped in then, calm but firm. He read the charges again: fraud, unlawful confinement, elder neglect. Claire barely listened. Her eyes stayed fixed on me. When the officers let her out, she turned once more and said, softly, "I just wanted a better life." The words hollowed me out. Marcus was charged too. The so-called investment fund was a shell, part of a network of false firms that vanished as soon as deposits cleared. The police traced our missing money through half a dozen accounts before it disappeared into an encrypted chain somewhere overseas. The numbers were gone, but the damage remained to my wife, to my daughter, to whatever faith I had left in the world I thought I understood. In the weeks that followed, the community rallied around us. Neighbors dropped off casseroles. A church group brought blankets to the hospital. Reporters called, wanting the human angle. I ignored them. How could I explain that the real tragedy wasn't just a crime? It was that my own blood had chosen greed over compassion, calculation over conscience. Evelyn returned home eventually, weaker but stable. The basement was sealed, cleaned, repainted, though I rarely go down there anymore. Too much of her silence still lives in those walls. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I replay that last conversation with Claire. I try to find a moment, years earlier, when I might have steered her away from the path she took. Was it when she dropped out of university? When she met Marcus? When I praised her for being ambitious? You tell yourself children inherit your better parts. But sometimes, they just inherit your blindness. I see her in court every few months now, thin, pale, her eyes downcast. She avoids my gaze. Maybe that's mercy. Maybe that's shame. Whatever it is, I no longer look for answers. Some wounds aren't meant to be healed. They're meant to be remembered. And memory, I've learned, is its own kind of justice. The first court hearing came in early spring, when the snow still clung to the edges of driveways like stubborn memories. I remember the sound of the radiator hissing in the courtroom and the smell of old varnish mixed with paper. Evelyn sat beside me, wrapped in her favorite gray shawl, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't speak much anymore, not because she couldn't, but because words seemed to have lost their meaning. Claire was led in quietly. No handcuffs visible. The lawyers had arranged for that. But the air around her was heavy, expectant. Marcus came next, looking more irritated than remorseful, as though all this were an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. The prosecutor read out the charges: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, unlawful confinement, neglect causing bodily harm. Each word was a hammer striking a nail into the coffin of a life I used to know. When the judge asked if Claire wished to make a statement, her lawyer whispered to her. She nodded once and stood. Her voice was softer than I remembered, no longer sharp or assured, but trembling at the edges. "I didn't mean for things to go that far," she said. "I thought I was helping us build a future. I made mistakes. I let Marcus make decisions I should have questioned, but I never wanted to hurt my mother." The courtroom was still. Her words might have sounded like remorse to strangers, but to me, they were the echo of denial, the refusal to call cruelty by its name. I sat there, not as a father or a victim, but as a man watching the final disintegration of something he had built his whole life, the illusion of a safe, decent family. Marcus showed no such hesitation. When it was his turn, he blamed her entirely. Said she'd convinced him the money was hers to use. Said he was misled. Said he was a fool in love. The judge listened without expression. Later, The sentences came down like slow thunder. Marcus received 6 years for fraud and unlawful confinement. Claire, my only daughter, was sentenced to 4. The judge spoke kindly when he said it could have been more severe had it not been for her cooperation, her lack of prior offenses, her potential for rehabilitation. Potential. The word felt cruelly misplaced. Afterward, Alvarez met me in the corridor. He shook my hand, the gesture more human than formal. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. I nodded because there was nothing else to say. The right thing had cost me my daughter, my peace, my faith in the neatness of good and evil. Life after justice isn't as clean as the movies make it. There's no sense of closure, no tidy fade out with gentle music. There's just a long stretch of days afterward, each one demanding that you find a way to keep going. Evelyn came home for good a few months later. We moved her bed near the window so she could watch the trees shift through the seasons. She laughed again sometimes, though her mind floated in and out like a radio losing signal. Some mornings she asked about Claire. Other mornings, she didn't seem to remember she ever had a daughter. When she did ask, I told her the same gentle lie every time. She's working overseas for a while. She sends her love. And Evelyn would smile faintly, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket, and say, "That's good." She always wanted to see the world. It's strange how mercy can take the shape of a lie. I started volunteering at the local senior center that summer. It felt like something useful, something that might turn grief into service. I spoke to families about setting up safeguards, power of attorney protections, financial literacy, trust checks. I warned them not to leave paperwork to chance. And every time I did, I saw Evelyn's face in my mind, sitting in that dim basement corner, and it kept me from softening the truth. Because the truth is this: betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the hands you once taught to hold a spoon. A year passed. Claire wrote from prison, short letters, careful ones. They came once a month, folded neatly, smelling faintly of ink and regret. The first few, I couldn't bring myself to read. I stacked them in a drawer. But one evening, after Evelyn had fallen asleep, I opened one. It said only this: "Dad, I think about Mom every day. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you know I understand now. I was chasing something hollow. I thought I was smarter than everyone else. But all I did was destroy what mattered most. If she ever asks about me, please tell her I'm sorry." I didn't reply right away. It took me 3 months to find the right words. "You hurt us," I wrote back. "You hurt her. But I believe punishment means nothing if it doesn't teach you something. So learn. When you're free, start again, not as the daughter who betrayed, but as the woman who faced it. That's all I can offer you." I mailed it and felt no relief, only a quiet acceptance. Evelyn passed 2 winters later, peaceful, her hands folded as if in prayer. I buried her under the old maple tree at the edge of town, the same place she once took Claire to feed the birds when she was little. Now, some evenings I sit there on the bench beside that grave. The sun dips low, painting the stone in gold, and I think about the strange symmetry of life, how love and pain can coexist, how even the worst betrayals can't erase the years that came before them. I don't know if Claire will ever forgive herself. I don't know if I ever fully can. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let the cruelty of others turn you into something smaller. If there's a moral in all this, if the story has to mean something, it's this: trust is the most precious currency we hold. Guard it. Teach it. And if it's ever broken, let the lesson, not the wound, be what endures. It's been almost 5 years since the trial ended. Time, as it turns out, doesn't heal in straight lines. It folds, it warps, it carries echoes from rooms you thought you'd already walked out of. I live alone now, in a smaller house near Lakefield. Evelyn's old photographs sit in frames along the mantel. One of her laughing with a garden hose in her hand, another of Claire as a child sitting on her shoulders, her hair tangled in sunlight. Sometimes I still wake up expecting to hear Evelyn humming in the kitchen. For a few seconds, I let myself believe she's still here, still making tea in her favorite chipped mug. But then the quiet folds back over the house, and reality settles like dusk. Grief is a patient tenant. It doesn't leave, it simply changes rooms. The community here has been kind. Every Sunday after church, I help organize a small workshop for families caring for aging parents. We talk about dementia, power of attorney, warning signs of financial exploitation, things I wish I'd known earlier before my world fell apart. People listen differently when you speak from a wound that never quite healed. They lean forward, not because they want to pity you, but because they know they could be next. One woman, a widow named Margaret, funny coincidence of names, told me her son had been pressuring her to invest in some online trading platform. He says it's for my benefit, she whispered, eyes glistening. That he can double my savings. Should I trust him? I looked at her, really looked, and said gently, ask him to put it in writing, then ask someone else to read it. She nodded slowly. That was enough. Sometimes all people need is permission to protect themselves, even from the ones they love. Claire writes every few months now. Her letters are longer, steadier. She tells me about the rehabilitation classes she's taking, about helping older inmates write to their families. She even joined a small reading group where they discuss novels about forgiveness and consequence. Last summer, she wrote something that caught me off guard. Dad, I think I finally understand what you meant in your letter. Forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about deciding what kind of person you'll be after it happens. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure I never become that person again. I sat with that line for a long time. It reminded me of Evelyn's quiet strength, how she could forgive without forgetting, love without denying the damage. I don't visit Claire in person. Not yet. The thought still twists something deep inside me. But I keep her letters. I read them sometimes when the loneliness becomes too loud. And I can admit this much now. A small part of me hopes she keeps writing even after she's released. Because silence, I've learned, is not peace. It's just absence. One night in early autumn, I dreamt of Evelyn again. In the dream, she was sitting by the lake, the same lake where we'd spent our honeymoon half a century ago. The air smelled of pine and rain. She looked healthy, radiant, her eyes clear, her hair unburdened by time. She turned to me and said, "Don't spend what's left of your life inside the ruins. Build something new from them." I woke up with tears in my eyes. But it wasn't sorrow, it was release. That morning, I took a walk down to the old maple tree where she's buried. The grass had grown tall, and the leaves had already begun their yearly surrender. I sat on the bench, the wood cool beneath my palms, and I spoke out loud, not to her grave, but to the space between us. "I'm trying, love," I said. "You be proud of how far I've come. And maybe one day, I'll see her again. Not as the woman who hurt us, but as the girl you once kissed goodnight." A breeze came through then, soft but insistent, rustling the leaves. I took it as an answer. After that day, something shifted. I stopped seeing myself as the man who lost everything and started seeing myself as the man who survived it. I joined a local advocacy group for elder justice. I began writing articles for community papers, sharing my story under a pseudonym. People reached out, strangers, caregivers, children of parents with dementia, and they said my words helped them recognize the warning signs before it was too late. That became my quiet mission, to make sure Evelyn's suffering wasn't in vain. It's strange, the way tragedy can give you purpose. You spend months, even years, wishing the pain would fade, and then one day, you realize it's what's keeping you human. The pain doesn't vanish. It refines you. Claire will be eligible for parole in 3 years. She'll be in her mid-30s then, still young enough to start over, still burdened enough to understand the cost of deceit. I think, when that day comes, I'll meet her halfway. Not at the prison gates, not with anger, but somewhere neutral, a coffee shop, perhaps, near the lake Evelyn loved. I'll sit across from her, and we'll talk like two people haunted by the same ghost. I won't ask her to justify herself. I won't list the things she broke. She already knows. All I'll ask is whether she's found something true inside the wreckage. Because if there's anything I've learned from these years of watching trust crumble and rebuild, it's that truth, once you face it, can still be a form of love. A few weeks ago, I gave a talk at university in Peterborough. The students were studying social ethics, and one of the professors had read my articles. He wanted me to share a personal perspective on elder exploitation and family betrayal. I was nervous at first. Public speaking wasn't my strength, not anymore. My voice trembles now and then, an old man's vibrato. But as I began to speak, the room quieted. I told them about Evelyn's illness, about Claire's manipulation, about how easily kindness can be weaponized when someone stops seeing people as human and starts seeing them as opportunity. When I finished, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. She looked barely 20, with a notebook full of scribbles and empathy in her eyes. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, "after everything that's happened, do you still believe people are good?" The question hung in the air. I thought about it for a long time before answering. "Yes," I said finally. But goodness isn't the absence of harm. It's the choice to face harm and still choose decency afterward. My daughter did something terrible, but I also believe she's capable of redemption. Maybe that's naive, or maybe that's what keeps the world turning, the hope that people can learn. The class was silent. Then someone clapped. Others followed. I don't remember the applause as much as the feeling that, for the first time in years, I was telling the story not as a warning, but as proof of survival. Now, as I sit by the window each morning, watching the lake shift from silver to gold with the sunrise, I realize something that took me half a lifetime to learn. Justice isn't a destination. It's a direction, a compass that points you back to yourself. The law gave me closure, but forgiveness gave me freedom. Evelyn would have understood that. She always saw the world in shades of mercy I couldn't comprehend. I think she'd tell me now that holding on to hate is like gripping a burning coal. You're the one who gets scorched. So I've decided to let go, not for Claire's sake, but for mine. Sometimes I receive letters from advocacy groups inviting me to speak, to consult, to share what I've learned. They call me an expert on resilience. That word still feels strange in my mouth. I didn't earn resilience. I just kept breathing when everything else fell apart. But maybe that's all resilience is, the art of breathing through brokenness until it becomes something you can live with. I visit Evelyn's grave every Sunday now. I bring her white lilies, her favorite, and I read aloud the letters Claire sends me. I like to think she hears them somehow, that she knows her daughter is trying to find her way back. Last Sunday, I read the newest one. It said, "Dad, they're letting me start an apprenticeship next month. I'll be working in the prison library, helping inmates with accounting and writing. It feels good to be useful again. I still dream of Mom sometimes. In my dreams, she forgives me. I don't think I deserve it, but I hope I'll earn it one day." I folded that letter slowly, tucked it back into my coat, and whispered, "She already has, Claire. She already has." A bird landed on the branch above, its feathers catching the afternoon light. The wind moved gently through the trees, and for a brief moment, I felt something like peace. Maybe forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. Maybe it's about learning to live inside it without letting it consume you. That's what Evelyn taught me. That's what this story, our story, became. Not just about betrayal, but about endurance, about finding humanity even after it's been tested beyond recognition. So, to anyone listening, anyone who's ever been broken by someone they trusted, remember this. You can lose your money, your home, even your faith in family. But if you keep your heart open to truth, you haven't lost yourself. And if you're the one who caused the pain, don't hide from it. Face it. Learn from it. Become someone better because of it. Because in the end, the measure of a life isn't what was taken from you, but what you built after. That's the legacy Evelyn left me. That's the story I carry. And that, I think, is enough.